Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maria Korin. I am an LLM student here at Duke from Ukraine, and I'm very happy that you have decided to attend this event. Thank you very much for coming. Also wanted to extend our thanks to Duke Law School community for helping in organizing this event, especially Duke Bar Association, International Law Society, and National Security Law Society, and of course our speakers. And we have wonderful speakers today. First is Ivana Bilic. She's an attorney from New York, and she's a board member of Razum for Ukraine. It's a human rights organization. So she's going to talk about annexation of Crimea. We have senior judge Bogdan Futey from U.S. Court of Federal Claims, and he is with us today. And he's also a founder of Ukrainian American Bar Association, and there is one in the United States. And third speaker is Victor Root, and he is a Duke Law graduate. He graduated in 1975, and he is also head of International Law Committee of Ukrainian American Bar Association. So let's welcome our speakers. Our speakers are going to talk for 10-15 minutes, and then we will be open for questions and answers. So, Victor, would you?
Thank you very much. It scares me to think that I graduated in 1975. Frightening, but it's a fantastic school, as you know. I didn't recognize the place. I've been back once or twice, but not as a speaker. Let me rush through this very, very quickly. We only have about 10 or 12 minutes per speaker, and it's a tremendously important subject. My issue is, why does any of this stuff matter in terms of what's going on in Ukraine? There are certain persons in the official foreign policy establishment in the United States, primarily in the administration, whose position is that what's happening in Ukraine is unfortunate, it's sad, but it does not pose a fundamental national security threat to the United States. I suggest that is wrong. Let me give you a little background on Ukraine. You may be surprised to learn that Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. It's about the size of Germany, England, and Hungary combined. The geographic center of Ukraine, of Europe, is in the western part of Ukraine. Ukraine has a very old democratic tradition. It produced a constitution 72 years before the United States Constitution, which projected the same concept of checks and balances on the government, the concept of natural law and the like that were then written up in Philadelphia. Judge Futey may say a word or two about that. And last but not least, just as a footnote, I always thought it was curious when I found this out, that you all have heard of Jamestown, right, the first English settlement in the United States. Well, John Smith, the founder of Jamestown, was given refuge and nursed back to health in Ukraine before he made this trip to the New World. A little footnote of historical interest, perhaps. More importantly, though, Ukraine was pivotal. The Russian invasion and occupation of Ukraine after World War II was pivotal to the creation of what became the Soviet Union, the USSR. Ukraine was the second most important republic after Russia, and when Ukraine declared independence, the USSR fell apart. And it's interesting to note that the United States did not support Ukrainian independence, and yet when it happened, and when the Soviet Union simply dissolved on Christmas Day, December 25th, 1991, the United States, of course, wasn't embarrassed to take credit for winning the so-called Cold War. After that occurred, and this is critical, and this is where we're going to see the ripple effect of what's happening today in Ukraine. Ukraine became the third largest nuclear country in the world. Its nuclear arsenal was larger than England's and China's, and only Russia's and America's nuclear forces were larger. The United States, Britain, and Russia talked Ukraine into surrendering its nuclear arsenal. France and China later on signed on in exchange for so-called assurances of Ukrainian national sovereignty and territorial integrity. And that is what is at issue right now. In addition, the United States oversaw the destruction of Ukrainian conventional weaponry in addition to the destruction of nuclear arms. So what's happening in Ukraine? Well, very simply, Russia invaded Ukraine initially, as it did back after World War I, through proxies, through mercenaries, and then with its regular forces, occupied territory, annexed the Crimean Peninsula, and is doing that now in certain of Ukraine's eastern territories. This occurred in violation of pretty much every bilateral and multilateral agreement that Russia has signed, whether it's the UN Charter, the Helsinki Accords, or anything else. And it is happening by a country, Russia, which itself, as you know, is a member of the United Nations, although you may be interested for a law review article to examine the question, how is it that Russia became a member of the United Nations? It never was. Russia was never a member of the United Nations. Ukraine and Belarus were founding members. The Soviet Union was a founder of the United Nations. Russia never was. So how did it get into that seat and exert that power? The long and the short of it is that we have a country now where Donetsk, a city of 1 million, has been pretty much leveled. We have approximately 5 million civilians that are out in the cold. People are starving to death. This is not the Sudan or Vietnam. It is cold. There's 2 feet of snow on the ground. We have approximately 1.7 million children that are deeply affected by this. What do you make of all of this? What does this extrapolate into? Well, let me suggest that ISIS is not the existential threat to the United States. Neither is Red China, nor is Iran or Iraq today. Back in the 1990s, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace wrote that whether Russian-led integration on the territory of the former USSR will pose a serious long-term challenge to the West depends in large part on the role that Ukraine plays or is compelled to play. Ukraine will do much to determine whether Europe and the world in the 21st century will be as bloody as they were in the 20th century. Russia, as we know, is the largest country in the world. Ukraine is big, but Ukraine is only about 2.5% the size of Russia. And for you to get an idea, we all know that Siberia is part of Russia, right? It's a region of Russia. Siberia has several regions. One of those regions is called Kolyma. Kolyma is the size of France, Spain, Japan, Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, Greece, Sweden, and North Korea combined. Kolyma used to be the largest concentration camp in the world. All right, that gives you the size of proportionality in terms of what Russia represents just geographically. Russia has more than half of the global stock of enriched uranium. It has the largest bacteriological, chemical, and nuclear arsenal of any country in the world. It's threatened the use of nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Take a look at Title 22 U.S. Code for the definition of terrorism. And you may ask yourself the question, where does that put Russia and Vladimir Putin today compared to individuals such as Gaddafi, Assad, and Saddam Hussein? Russia sources much of the computer expertise for North Korean cyber warfare. It deifies Stalin, laments the fall of the Soviet Union, and justifies its pact with Hitler in starting World War II. So when you look at that package, when you look at that brief synopsis of history, I suggest we have the following. A generation or two ago, talk with your parents, the United States faced the Soviet Union in pretty much an eyeball-to-eyeball standoff globally. We have Russia now entering the scene as the self-declared successor of the Soviet Union, but look what we have now on the map. We now have ISIS. We now have Red China. We now have Korea. We have Middle East up in flames. If we had a hard time dealing with the Soviet Union back then, what about now? The provocation, some authors have written that the West has been provocative and not doing enough vis-a-vis Russian aggression in Ukraine. I personally agree with that view, because when you take what Russia is doing, what has done, which is the invasion of sovereign territory, if you don't oppose it, yes, we have sanctions, but the sanctions have not changed anything yet. They may, but so far they have not. Then you have to put yourself into the shoes of friends and foes of the United States and ask yourself the question, well, if, for example, put yourself in the shoes of Iran. Should Iran adhere to any kind of agreement relating to curtailment on nuclear warfare capability in agreement with the West, if the West had that agreement with Ukraine and Ukraine disarmed? And yet, where the response to that has been in relative terms as feeble as it has been. You take the multiplier effect. Those of you who have or will be studying international law, as I did when I was here at Duke, the vast majority of international agreements, unless you're talking about the importation of a can of beans or maybe the exchange of climatic conditions in the Antarctic, there really isn't any effective third-party enforcement mechanism for maintaining territorial integrity and sovereignty of nations. That is a very delicate ecosystem that's kept together by the perceived self-interest of nations. If one country can flout that without a corresponding response from the rest of the international community, you run the risk of a huge conflagration starting off regionally and then just multiplying further and further and further. This is very abrupt. I'm sorry, I'm restricted in my time. I'll pass it on now to Judge Foutte for some further comments. We want to leave a lot of time, as much time as we can, for Q's and A's, and perhaps that'll be a little bit more informative at that time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. It's a pleasure to be here. I've never been here. I heard quite a bit, especially lately when your coach, the basketball coach, was greeted for winning 1,000 games. So that's really a great accomplishment. I will change a little bit the topic and talk about the legal dimension, what's happening legally in the country. Ukraine, as you are very much aware, has been in the center of attention since November 2013. And that is because of the revolution of dignity that took place. And the people of Ukraine were united, or are united, in their quest for nationhood, democracy, and the rule of law. The road is a difficult one, but I'm confident that they will be successful. In the middle of a war that is taking place right now, the government is proceeding with reforms in order for Ukraine to be integrated into the European Union. Reforms will not be possible unless Ukraine is able to defend itself properly from Russian aggression. The Ukrainian Freedom Support Act authorizes military help from the United States, and that must take place now or be too late. Time is of the essence. Now, I will give you very briefly the dates and something that happened during the Revolution of Dignity. As you know, it took place and started in November of 2013, and as a result of President Yanukovych refusing to sign the trade agreement with the European Union, the association agreement with the European Union. And then Maidan, or the Revolution of Dignity, begins on November 21st, and millions, hundreds, thousands, and finally 1 million participate in the peaceful protest against the policies of President Yanukovych. As a result of that, the government becomes very much concerned. Shootings take place, killings are ordered by the government, and we know about the 100 people that were killed as a result of what has happened. The president, at that time, Yanukovych, flees the country. The new head of the Rada, the parliament, the new prime minister, and new government are elected and installed. There are presidential elections that take scheduled for May the 25th of last year. Russia invades Crimea, as was stated, in violation of Ukraine's constitution, international law, and the Budapest Agreement, which was signed by the United States, Great Britain, Russia, China, and France, for the reasons that Victor has explained to you. There's intrusion into Ukraine by Russian separatists with the support of Russian troops and weapons. They invade Donbass and Luhansk, and actually everything is taking place up to now, regardless of the Minsk agreement that was reached last September between the European Union, Ukraine, and Russia. The presidential election and the parliamentary election took place, and on the basis of the monitoring results, the 2014 early presidential elections in Ukraine, as well as the parliamentary elections later on October 26th, did meet international standards for the conduct of democratic election. At the presidential election, over 60% of the people participated, excluding those regions not under government control, like Crimea, Donbass, and Donetsk regions. This signified that the majority of Ukraine's population was able to fully participate in the political process of the country. And Petro Poroshenko was elected president on the first run with 54% of the vote. The elections for parliament, again, the same monitors or the same observers came up with the same conclusion that was democratic, transparent, according to international standard. Ukrainians did vote and have overwhelmingly chosen to stay the course of the European integration. The European parties were those parties that have Europe in mind and integration into Europe did win, and they formed a coalition in the Parliament of Ukraine. There is an opposition from the former region's party. So that was a success. Now, during the elections, polls were taken. Issue number one was that concerned most of Ukrainians was security or the country. Issue number two was corruption. Issue number three dealt with civil society matters, then the economy and energy problems. Now, as far as corruptions, what happened immediately, a law to restore confidence in the government was passed. That's the illustration law. That is applied to individuals that were part of former President Yanukovych's government, starting in February 2010 up to February 21st, 2014. All of them, and then also individuals that were in the government while the revolution of dignity was taking place, and they did nothing to prevent they contributed to the killings or did nothing to prevent that. Also, people that were members of the Communist Party under the Soviet Union and members of the KGB. Now, in all of these laws that Ukraine passed during this government, actually draft laws were sent to the Venice Commission because of the concern how the European Union is going to react. So the Venice Commission did issue a report, and basically the report indicated that there were some problems. Generally, it was a good beginning, but there were some problems with the law, and they requested, recommended that Ukraine's parliament amend legislation, and they're working on that right now. And just for your information, there were positive aspects, and basically the main objective of the law was to conduct a process of vetting or lustration of public official based on a financial disclosure audit at the national and local levels. And the positive things, attempts to address issue of loyalty and integrity, also to determine the assets of individuals that became rich overnight. So that was, and it sets out a general legal framework for lustration of government officials. There were, however, some negative aspects, and that is the issue of short time really to handle this, the unclear definition and process, questions of presumptions of innocence, selective prosecution, retroactive application, and the meaning of the violation of oath of office, and the role of the courts in all of this. However, just 2 days ago, the president of the Venice Commission and President Poroshenko did talk, and they're working on these amendments, and hopefully they will take place to conform with the requirements of the European Union. Again, I want to stress the fact that this government is working very closely with the Venice Commission and the European Union just to make certain that the reforms that they are adopting are in line with what the European Union is requested of Ukraine, and Ukraine intends naturally to join the European Union. As you know, the trade agreement was signed when Mr. Poroshenko was elected president. Then, when Mr. Poroshenko became president, in June of last year, he immediately started proposing amendments to the Constitution, or a new draft on the Ukraine's Constitution. The Constitution that Ukraine had in 1996 adopted was actually praised by the Venice Commission and other international organizations for its support of individual rights, especially negative rights, separation of powers, rule of law, private ownership of property, and the various liberties of individuals, and a separate judicial system, which was very important. By the way, it's a twofold. You have a constitutional court and courts of general jurisdiction. So when Mr. Poroshenko became president, he introduced a new draft of the Constitution. Didn't get much support, unfortunately, so he sent it immediately to the Venice Commission, and the Venice Commission issued a report and actually commended for the abolition of the imperative mandate, that is, whether you belong to the party or you can then leave the party and still be a member in the parliament. And very important, the abrogation of the supremacy powers of the prosecutor's office. And this is an important step forward in complying with commitment made by Ukraine when joining the Council of Europe yet. And also, the Venice Commission commended Ukraine for the aspects of decentralization in the exercise of state power. Regional and district councils will be elected independently. Will elect independently their own bodies. State administrators at the regional and district level will be removed. Also, new terminology will be introduced. There'll be no more oblast, as you probably are familiar, but now will be regions, and this will be closer to the European Charter of Local Self-Government. This is very important, especially what's happening also in the eastern regions of Ukraine, dealing with the issue of autonomy, right, and decentralization. Interestingly, the draft did not contain any provisions as to judicial reform and the judiciary. And the Venice Commission called that attention in its opinion, basically saying that that should have been part, as well as the civil society, members of the civil society, lawyers, jurists, advocates, and professors should have been consulted. There is a problem, just for your information, with the judiciary. There was a law in the judiciary adopted in 2010 during Mr. Yanukovych's presidency. That law contained many provisions that are unconstitutional. However, because of his control of the courts didn't do anything to change that. For example, you have the fact that according to the Constitution, the Supreme Court is the highest court of courts of general jurisdiction. However, that was diminished, and all of a sudden, the higher specialized courts were the ones that were making the decisions, the final decisions in this matter. It was up to them then to send it to the Supreme Court or not. The other issue was that gave the president the power to liquidate courts. So if the president did not like a decision of the court, he could just liquidate the court and to dismiss judges for violation of the oath of office. There's no definition what constitutes an oath of office. And finally, problem with the Higher Council of Judges and the Higher Qualification Commission, Higher Council of Justice, I'm sorry, not judges, but justice, and the Higher Qualification Commission. They're responsible for the recommendation for appointment to the judiciary. There is right now, the president introduced a draft to amend, to do changes with the law on the judiciary that will be part of the Constitution, and also the Parliament did. Most recently, both drafts were united by a committee that was formed. So next week, I suspect there will be a discussion on this issue, and they will proceed forward not only with the amendments, but also with the law on the judiciary. Naturally, that would be part of the Constitution. However, any amendments to the Constitution and any changes that are made to the Constitution must be lawfully executed and applied. The Constitution basically says how the changes are to be made. Articles 154 to Article 159 make that a notation what is to be done. There's no question that the judiciary in Ukraine needs to be reformed. It must be a reform. What is needed is to strengthen the checks and balances, not control over the judiciary by the executive, provide salaries, et cetera, like we have in the United States. Judicial independence does not mean that judges do as they choose, but they as they must in accordance with the Constitution and laws of the country. Judicial independence in the final analysis will depend on the judges themselves. No one will respect the judges until the judges start respecting themselves. Mention was made by Victor of the Constitution of Philip Orlik. I talk about that all the time, and when I teach in Ukraine and other countries. In April, by the way, Ukraine, there will be an historic event. There will be a celebration of 305 years of the Constitution of Philip Orlik. That was enacted in 1710. And by the way, I had the concept of separation of powers, a separate judicial organ, a separate judicial tribunal, and also a concept of private ownership of property, and came 80 years before the Constitution of the United States. Having said that, I always kind of end my presentation on a positive note. There are many problems on the road to democracy and rule of law, but Ukraine so far has been successful. Hopefully, with the military situation solved, I think Ukraine will be able to do the proper reforms and be part of the European Union. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, everyone. If you don't mind, I will stay here. when I received this invitation to speak today, I was very thrilled. First of all, this is one of the best institutions in the country that attracts smartest and the best of the best. And second of all, this is the place where you get the best barbecue in the country. And of course, the issue is very important. And it has been voted as Ukraine has been voted as the most important story by the Wall Street Journal readers. And I believe by 75%. And the same opinion has been voiced in the New York Times. So why this issue has been so important has been already discussed by Victor and the judge. I would like you to take through the annexation of Crimea. Back in February, a group of students from NYU decided to come up with a report, which was also commissioned by the Ukrainian American human rights organization, Razom. And the report became known as the White Paper. And it was written as a pro bono service by an international team of lawyers, as yourself, based at New York University School of Law, and it was got lots of publicity, was circulated in the Congress, was circulated among the diplomats and just regular readers. In the report, why did students decide to come up with the report? The idea was to assist the media, governments, and international organizations, non-governmental organizations, businesses, academia, and individuals to understand what has happened, why it has happened, and what might happen next. We discuss in the report the critical role of Ukraine and Crimea to Russian infrastructure in gas supply in Eastern and Western Europe. Maria was very nice to give you handouts with the content and with the executive summary as well as conclusions. But if you go online to the razomforukraine.org/report, you will find the report itself and you will be able to read it. And actually look at the maps. And the maps will tell you a lot of the story behind this. Lots of pipes, actually, very important infrastructural pipes that transmit gas to Europe are in Ukraine. And with the annexation of Crimea, this might be, and the South Stream gas pipeline might be a new route, which will save lots of money and effort to Russia. And there are several issues I would like to touch on with respect to, so what is Crimea? Crimea is a peninsula, and let me get to the maps. Crimea is a peninsula and part of Ukraine, and Ukraine has 25 administrative units and plus Kiev and the city of Kiev, the capital, and the city of Simferopol. So when, during the Soviet Union times, when the Crimea was transferred from the Russian Soviet Republic to Ukrainian Soviet Republic in 1954, the transfer, all scientists and scholars agree that the transfer was legally binding. All of the legal system was a fiction, but it happened according to all of the rules and procedures. The dilemma is, you may hear a lot in the media that Crimea was a gift to Ukraine by Khrushchev, which is some actual scholars sign up to this theory and some don't believe this is true, because if you check the documents signed at the time, none of them have Khrushchev's name on it. Mark Kramer, for example, argues that it was important for Khrushchev to get the political importance in the former USSR. And Butkevich for example, argues that Khrushchev had nothing to do. It was actually, if he had something to do, it would jeopardize him becoming, getting his importance in the former USSR. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, a bunch of international treaties and documents have been signed and to recognize the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And some of the documents establish the key principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty in the world. And one of the main documents, obviously, is the UN Charter. Also, the final act of the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, signed in Helsinki on August 1st, 1975, which actually came up with the rules how to deal with, how to respect other countries' territorial integrity and sovereignty, and how to conduct military exercise, and how to give notice to other countries if you conduct a military exercise. Let me take you to the first document, Belaverskaya Pushcha Accord, signed in December 1991. That document, memorized, signed by the heads of the former republics, the former USSR, memorized and again signified the respect for territorial integrity and realization that the borders should be, that the countries should remain in the borders, in the same borders that when the Soviet Union collapsed. The significance of Budapest Memorandum has been discussed by Victor already, and I just would like to touch, we have a very interesting argument in the report, because many scientists argue whether it's a binding or not binding document. We believe it's a binding document, and we do arrive into conclusion that it can be also is binding under the unilateral declaration of the state. And the examples of that could be when France, for example, said that they will never do nuclear testing in the Pacific, and then they changed their mind. The international community came out and said, no, you cannot change your mind. You made a unilateral declaration. The same was done with respect to Egypt and Suez Canal and Jordan, I believe. And this is memorialized in the ICJ decision with respect to Burkina Faso. So the Budapest Memorandum is a very important document, and the signatories to that document are the following countries: the United States, United Kingdom, Ukraine, obviously. Later came in France and China on board. The Articles 1 and 2 of the memorandum impose clear obligations on countries to respect and support Ukraine's political independence and territorial integrity within the existing borders. Also, Ukraine reserved its right, if it's attacked by nuclear power, to withdraw from the nuclear proliferation agreement, which is also a dangerous, it can be have dangerous consequences, a dangerous precedent, as Victor already pointed out, for the rest of the world and other countries that are not, as stable as they may seem. Well, you probably heard also about the Black Sea Fleet Agreement, and you know that Ukraine leases its Black Sea naval bases to Russia, and the agreement has been extended in 2010. It didn't have lots of support among the population. However, former President Yanukovych extended that agreement with Russia. However, even under that agreement, it doesn't allow Russian military forces to go and invade another Ukraine per se, and doesn't allow them. Actually, they have a duty to abide by Ukrainian laws. and it's a very specific document that regulates the number of military, their obligations, and their use on the territory of Ukraine. And that argument is well supported by Eric Posner, the law professor from the University of Chicago. So after following the Maidan event, the Dignity Revolution, Ukraine found itself observing, and Ukrainians observing strange events. Military bases and airports were taken by military personnel with no insignia, which is by itself a violation of a bunch of international treaties and agreements. Russia denied the involvement for quite a while. However, our report came out on April 15. Talk about tax day. You will always remember this date, right? But on April 17, President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, actually came out and he admitted that the armed man in military uniform without insignia, known as the Little Green Man, are actually Russian military force, Russian troops. He stated, Crimean self-defense forces were, of course, backed by Russian servicemen. They acted very appropriately, but as I've already said, decisively and professionally. So, why, again, those questions remain unanswered. Why would military troops, military forces from a foreign state end up themselves in a foreign state? Also, it's very interesting to point out, it's not mentioned a lot, but after Ukraine became independent and signed Belovushskaya-Pushcha Accords, there were several attempts by the Russian parliament to denounce several agreements and get Crimea back. It's a mystery to me why Ukraine and other Western countries didn't pay attention to that fact, because it could have been portrayed as actually some sort of aggression with respect to territorial, at least planning with respect, and have some plans with respect to invade in territorial integrity of Ukraine. Obviously, the referendum, March 16, 2014 referendum has been recognized as unlawful, and it's unlawful by domestic laws of Ukraine. Ukraine, again, why I mentioned Ukraine is comprised of 25 regions, plus the city of Kiev and Sevastopol, is undivided, indivisible, and inviolable country. And it's and the Article 73 provides Article 73 of Constitution of Ukraine provides that any change to the territorial integrity of Ukraine has to be done with respect to the nationwide referendum. And and Article 72 outlines the mandatory procedure. So basically, I'm not going to bore you with all the details and all other articles, but basically, not only did the referendum stripped the rest of the Ukrainian citizens of their right to participate in the political process and vote on such an important matter, and which was unconstitutional, but it also was illegitimate because the Constitution of Ukraine, the Constitution of Autonomous Republic of Crimea does not allow Crimea to have referendums on the matters of territorial integrity of Ukraine. It's very important to remember that Crimea used to be just a region in the former USSR, and after Ukraine became independent, it became autonomous republic. So, although Ukraine is a developing democracy and a young democracy, it elevated the status of Crimea to the autonomous republic, which is a totally different status, and I'm sure you appreciate the difference. On March 14, the Constitutional Court of Ukraine came out and said that that the referendum will be unconstitutional, and asked the Crimean authorities to cease all preparations for for it immediately. Also, the Venice Commission rendered the similar opinion on the referendum, and it also went into very detailed analysis of the questions presented for the referendum. Basically, and it came to the conclusion that the questions that the voters were presented at the referendum they were not legally meaningful because they didn't provide them with the status quo choice, and also some of the questions were just didn't make any sense to the voters because not only the referendum was conducted in less than 10 days, but the voters also were uneducated on all of those issues. The results of the referendum, the official results stated that 96.7% participants voted for Crimea and Sevastopol in favor of joining Russia. However, interesting fact that the Russian Human Rights Council came out with the presumably correct numbers, and which indicated that only 15 to 30% of voters participated in the process, and only half of them voted for to join Russia. In 2 days, Crimea was annexed by Russia and became an integral part of Russia, which is also in violation of Russian law. And you can check the Venice Commission on that decision as well. And also, I would urge you to check the International Criminal Court and the Rome Statute and the specifics description of the crime of aggression, which. So we also came out with the recommendations, and again, you have recommendations in front of you in the handout. And one more very important thing, I would like to draw your attention to this poll conducted in May 2014, and that shows the opposition to Russian intervention by population of Ukraine, and you see that this is overwhelming opposition, and then even more people opposed this intervention in October 2014. And at this point, I would like to open the floor for the questions and answers. And before I do that, I would like to thank you sincerely, Duke Law, International Law Society, National Security Law Society, and Duke Bar Association, as well as Maria Hurun, for organizing this, putting so much effort into this, and bringing this excellent community of the brightest of the brightest and the smartest of the smartest to think about those issues and participate in and looking for the solutions. Thank you.
I have a question. Yeah, I'm Ruslan Abdirashid from Kazakhstan, LLM student. Do you have any idea why U.S. government is so concerned about making Russia angry by arming Ukraine with lethal weapons? Because Russia is refusing. Russia is claiming that there is no Russian troops. So why U.S. government is so concerned about that?
I don't know. I guess we'll try to answer it very, very rapidly. I mean, when Russians invaded Crimea, they also said there were no Russian troops until later on they said they had Russian troops. I think the concern is for all of us, and as Victor has stated it, the concern, this is, Ukraine, if Ukraine goes, then the problem becomes Europe, entire Europe, become the Baltic countries, Eastern Europe, Poland, Romania, you have in Bulgaria, and then Europe goes, and if Europe goes, well, then there's a problem for the United States of America, and Victor spoke about that, but go ahead.
Let me suggest, that's a good question, and it goes to a much more generic issue. I see you guys sitting here, and for a lot of you, I can understand this sounds like so much Greek, because I know the courses you had before and after this, and that's where your mind is. Here's the point. The United States, unfortunately, historically, has suffered from what I will call a national attention deficit disorder when it comes to foreign affairs. We have a terrible sense of history and geography, not only of our own, never mind the rest of the world. And when you look at the broad swath of history in the last 100 years, when you've had tyranny and aggression challenging Western democracies, particularly the United States, we eventually woke up. But basically, most of the time, we wound up sleepwalking, whistling past the graveyard. Things that were there, facts, history, we didn't want to address the issue. We wanted to push it away. It happened with World War I, World War II, it happened with the Cold War, it happened with Korea, it happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and on the flip side, it happened also with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which came as a huge surprise to everybody, and I scratched my head asking everybody, why was that such a big surprise? Look at, for example, the shooting down of the Malaysian airliner over Ukraine by Russian mercenaries controlled out of Russian territory. Remember the Malaysian airliner going down in the Indian Ocean, like a few weeks before that? Do you remember the non-stop coverage on every station, on all the cable stations all over, like, where did this plane go? Well, why is it? What is it in the human psyche that doesn't want us to address what happened with the Malaysian airliner that was shot down over Ukraine when a German commission, a Belgian commission, and a Finnish commission, independent of each other, came down to the same conclusion, that it was Russian weaponry in the hands of people controlled by Russia with the command given out of Russia. Why has the shooting down of innocents blown out of the sky, why don't we hear about it? Why don't we have that investigation? Why isn't it on the news? You can find it if you dig into it on the internet. But there is, I think, a predisposition of democratic societies comfortable in our lives and with our daily pursuits and figuring out what is the best commercial on Super Bowl to push aside, to defer, to postpone, and to avoid nasty problems around the world that history has taught us can accelerate and kick us in the head, but we ignore them anyway. I think it's an unfortunate aspect also perhaps of democracies where we're tolerant of everything to the nth degree until we're standing on the edge of the precipice. So I don't think the issue is just about Russia. I think there is a deeper sort of cultural, political phenomenon that has enveloped the West and Europe and the United States. We want to deal with sanctions. I got news for you. Sanctions are provocative. You know why? Because sanctions have lined up the Russian people behind Putin. And for them, sanction proves that what they did was good. Sanctions will not move Russia or people or tyrants like that from their goal. You think Putin's going to turn around and pull out of Crimea? What are you smoking? It ain't going to happen. I don't care what kind of sanctions you have. And as everything else in life, like teaching a kid, you do things that are a little painful at the beginning, but they save a lot of grief later on. All right? I don't know how much it would cost to arm Ukraine with conventional arms, and I'll tell you, it's a hell of a lot less than another nuclear missile silo in Bismarck, North Dakota. Okay? So that's a bit of a rambling response. But
one addition to that, I was going to say, already you have some people that are calling this the beginning of World War III. You probably read it in the newspapers. If the problem is not solved in Ukraine, you really will have an ongoing World War III taking place. Then what do? So we better get some lethal weapons to Ukraine to help itself, to defend itself, and to defend Europe and the rest of the world.
I want to answer. My name is Tatiana. I'm from Ukraine. I'm from Kiev. I was in Maidan.
flying on the date that Malaysia Air was shot down from Amsterdam. I was boarding along those people who were flying with Malaysia Air in Amsterdam. So the Ukrainian Freedom Act authorized the United States to provide with lethal weapons, but nothing has been provided as of yet. And today was a very violent day. Today, people were bombed and shelled. And have you seen the picture of a 2-year-old girl, 2-year-old baby without a foot? And it was shelled by Russian weapons. Grandmothers in Russia who have been watching non-stop information pollution to their minds day and night are asking, where the separatists get the newest tanks and weapons? The answer is finally coming to Russian simple people. That's answer to you. Sorry. Victor, you had a very interesting point. You says, if something of the scope happened in Iran, I believe it was Iran, I'm sorry, I was a little bit late, there will be a different international response. That's something that bothers me too. There is no international response. Ukraine is suffering, bleeding, fighting, and the Ukrainian Freedom Act does not still provide any weapons. We have a rally is happening in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
It does provide.
Yeah, let me, I see where you're going. Let me interject just very quickly because we're running out of time. You know, this is not an issue of competition between whores and everything else. I want to make 2 points. ISIS has captured our imagination. It's on the tube day in and day out. And now we haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. I read about, you know, the birding of the Jordanian pilot captured in a cage, right? If we wanted to, we could get rid of ISIS. We could turn ISIS into dust. Okay? We can't deal that way with Russia because of the weaponry that we've allowed it to accumulate, okay, which we've supported. We have to deal it in another way. And the issue with Ukraine is not just a question of an attack on Ukraine and what's happening in Ukraine. By the way, what's happening to civilians in Ukraine? Take the shirt off. They get a rat. They put a rat on the stomach of a human being, and they take a hot cage out of wire. It's red hot. And they put it over the rat. The rat wants to escape. What does the rat do? He eats through the stomach of the person and kills him. That's what happens. I give that simply as a point of fact that terrible things are happening, but our concern and our position should be not because it's happening in Ukraine, but what it symbolizes, and it's symptomatic of the destruction of the world order that we have cobbled together since World War II under the United Nations Charter and every other international agreement, and it is being flushed down the toilet. And what will the international community do about it? It is going to impact everything. I mentioned the fact about the loss of credibility in dealing with nuclear disarmament because of the Budapest Memorandum and Ukraine being left out to dry. It's going to happen on everything. Countries are going to say, I'm not going to listen to what I sign, I'm not going to comply, and I don't care. The international order, international law, because we don't have a reliable, predictable third-party enforcement mechanism, except in some instances, international order relies on an enlightened self-interest and the realization of countries that there has to be reciprocity, or at the end of the day, everybody's going down the toilet. That is what is being challenged. It is the type of thing that is occurring in Ukraine that is the danger to the world order, not just what is occurring, but the type of thing that's occurring.
I just want to say one other thing along with this. There is a move right now, and Ukraine has given jurisdiction to the International Criminal Court, where Ukraine can bring an action against Putin for all the crimes that are being committed against the Ukrainian people. So we will see soon how the International Criminal Court will gather the information, gather all the testimony, and what charges they're going to bring against Mr. Putin.
There are 3 more questions. Quickly, please. Yes.
So I was just wondering, I know this presentation is about the legal dimensions and you all talked about that very well, but I just wanted to ask as to the cultural dimensions sort of going on. Though I've lived in America for a long time, I was born in Zaporozhye, Ukraine, and I was just wondering to what extent sort of, not all certainly of the violence, but at least some of the violence can be attributed to the fact that people identify sort of cross-border in a cultural sense, that like a lot of the people in the regions.
Okay, thank you. I got the question. You know what? I'll get this question. Well, again, this is a little bit, the context of this discussion is a legal context. So let's discuss the cultural dimensions after the panel. And actually, I think Maria will be the best person to answer this because she's native of Donetsk and she probably knows so much about this. I promise you.
May I just interject here, because during the polls that were conducted in those areas, 70% of people living there, whether they speak one language or another, consider themselves Ukrainians to be.
Right. The language does not necessarily, again, the language doesn't, I don't think, I'm not sure if you're asking about the language per se. Please, I'm sorry.
This invasion of Crimea would be sort of a first step in a bigger expansionist Russian program or agenda. And if that's the case and this evidence is actually there, which other countries, either in Asia or Eastern Europe, would have to worry?
Okay, I'll take this very quickly. Well, first of all, it's not the first, Crimea is not the first expansion. This happened in Transnistria. This happened in South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and Ukraine is a natural step. So I don't think, but again, the Baltic states will be probably the next one. But again, I'm not in Putin's head, and I would never want to be in his head, probably.
No more?
One more question.
You mentioned Kazakhstan. You know, President Putin has stated that Kazakhstan is not a real country, right? And that
there was no state before 1991.
Right, and he also, as you know, northern Kazakhstan is filled with.
Yeah, we have same problems. Russian bases, the longest.
But you have a large Russian population.
The longest
also.
land border in the world with Russia.
Right.
Russian population.
Think about this. When the former Iranian president, whatever his name is, it was a tongue twister, I don't care to remember his name, said Israel does not have the right to exist, okay? And you think about that, and you think about the mentality, what goes into it, and you extrapolate the possibilities from that statement. It's pretty horrific. And now you take somebody like Putin who says Kazakhstan or Ukraine does not that they don't have a right to exist. They don't. They don't exist. Now take that one and think about it and extrapolate what you can out of that. These are very telling, to me, just earth-shattering statements that nobody seems to pause over. We're out of time.